A strong tropical low is set to dump record rainfall over the Northern Territory as another tropical cyclone threatens to impact the Queensland coastline at the end of next week. Your latest forecast update for January 15th, 2024, brought to you by Force 13 Australia and Oceania. You can see this strong tropical low is currently centred over about Wave Hill or Timber Creek in the Northern Territory, and it's moving towards the West Australian Northern Territory border actually, and it is now expected to swing back into the Northern Territory and dump an incredible amount of rainfall. And we're also tracking another potential tropical cyclone that could impact the Queensland coastline. All of that plus more in the next 18 minutes, so make sure you stick around to the end. If you are brand new here, please do consider subscribing, because it really does help us out. Leave a like on the video while you're at it. Taking a look at the current national picture, you can see rain and storms up in the nation's north, and a lot of rainfall is expected. White Eyes at over 300 millimetres in the last 24 hours, with a lot more to come. Rainfall as well across Cairns and the Daintree rainforest area, and also some rain extending down the Queensland coastline towards Brisbane and the Gold Coast. There's going to be storms across Central Australia today, and a lot of hot weather actually across Central Australia, with daytime maxima of at least 45 for a lot of locations. And there's also some severe thunderstorms down around the Esperance region in southwest and Western Australia. Those are delivering some very heavy rainfall, with up to 70 millimetres falling in a 1 hour period just outside of Esperance. Some very heavy rainfall down there. Now we're taking a look at tropical cyclone formation chances. Well, this is a very busy map, let me tell you, and I don't blame you if you get a headache just looking at it. Got that very low 5% chance of development now in the bottom part Gulf. We're not expecting this storm to form into a tropical cyclone. It's got a slightly better chance of forming in the Gulf of Carpentaria, because those two areas are the same tropical low at 10%, but again, I'm dropping those chances because it just doesn't look possible at this point. And then we've got that high chance, 60% chance of formation in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and also that 40% chance in that Coral Sea system, which is one that we need to be watching very closely. Take a look at the Access G3 rainfall run for the next 10 days. You can see the very slow movement of that powerful tropical low up towards Tuesday and Wednesday. It really hasn't moved until about Friday, actually, when it's moving down south of Katherine and then into central South Australia. Now, there's been a big shift in the forecast, which I will break down later on in the video. This storm no longer really enters Queensland. It doesn't even get into the Gulf of Carpentaria either, so it should actually save Queensland from the absolute worst case scenario in terms of rainfall, and by next Monday and Tuesday it's dying off in the middle of the Northern Territory desert, still dumping a lot of rainfall there. As you can see, Tuesday and Wednesday next week, a very powerful tropical cyclone blasts right through Townsville. That's a category 4 right there, and that is a forecast that we need to be watching very, very closely, let me tell you. So now taking a look at the temperature run, you can see it's very normal for the next 10 days for the Australian summer. There's no extreme hots or extreme colds until about early next week, and we start to see those 50-degree days start to creep back into Western Australia, which is getting on the hotter side for the West Australian state, considering that 50 degrees is approaching record temperatures. You can see that next weekend, Saturday and Sunday, that hot spell extends across South Australia and into Western Australia as well, delivering those very high temperatures there. And with the passage of that tropical low, it also drives a lot of heat into northern New South Wales and southern Queensland, and even into Victoria as well. We could be seeing days approach the 42-degree threshold in some of those locations, and maybe even one or two spots of 45 in New South Wales, so very hot there. Now take a look at the winds for the tropical zones. You can see those that cyclone up in the Indian Ocean develops by around Tuesday or Wednesday, so tomorrow or the next day. And you can see also that powerful tropical low really doesn't get itself going anymore into a tropical cyclone. It does get cyclone force winds about Thursday or Friday and into early next weekend, but it really doesn't become a fully fledged tropical cyclone as it moves into the Northern Territory. And then you can see next Monday and Tuesday that monster tropical cyclone. You're talking low 930 millibars in terms of pressure. If this was to materialize, and I can tell you there is model support for this scenario, we have a very concerning cyclone to be watching over the next 10 days. So that's worrying, and I will be breaking that down in incredible detail in the next 10 minutes or so. Now we're taking a look at the satellite imagery to get an idea of this tropical low and the thunderstorms that it's blowing up. You can see there's strong thunderstorms moving around the center of the system right now. It's got very defined rotation. It's looking very healthy, let me tell you, and those are delivering some very heavy rainfall across the Northern Territory coastline, extending up towards Darwin, and it's also not sparing the Kimberley region of Western Australia either. But that's all from this part of the video. We're going to jump over and break down these two cyclones and also the rainfall event that's going to happen over the Northern Territory, so stick around. Okay, so as the sun rises over the Northern Territory this morning, you can see this defined tropical low center located probably around the Timber Creek area around Bulla. It is a very nice looking tropical low. It's looking very healthy, that's for sure. And if this was over water, I'm pretty sure that this would actually get upgraded to a tropical cyclone. It's actually looking that good. And it's already got some fairly strong winds as well, with winds on the northern side of the system well away from the centre, approaching sort of 30 knots at this time. So it is very strong in terms of winds, and these winds are only going to get stronger throughout today and into tomorrow as the cyclone intensifies and moves inland because of an effect called the Brown Ocean effect. And that's going to happen because this tropical cyclone dumps so much rainfall over parts of the Northern Territory around Daly River, where we're expecting another 300 to 400 millimetres in some locations throughout the rest of today. Now, Wada has already received, I believe, 294 millimetres of rain in the last 24 hours. So an incredible amount of rain has fallen there, and it's only going to get worse until about Wednesday, when hopefully the conditions start to ease off a little bit as this tropical low moves further towards the east. Now, we will take a look at rainfall, considering that is the main threat from this system. You can see the pressure overlaid on this tropical low. You can see a central pressure of 993 millibars. That is a very strong tropical low. I've seen hurricanes in the northern hemisphere with higher pressures than this, so this is quite a substantial tropical low, that's for sure, and it will be driving a lot of thunderstorm activity and a lot of rain activity across parts of the Northern Territory and into Kakadu. You can see it really just stalls over Wednesday and into Thursday. It refuses to move in the central Northern Territory until maybe about Friday, when it looks like it starts to get a bit of an idea of where it wants to go, and still just dropping these incredible rainfall totals on the northern side of it up to, you're probably looking at around 25 to 50 millimetres an hour for days straight, consistent rainfall and very heavy rainfall as well, which will push rivers beyond their major flooding alerts. And there's very good model consensus with where this cyclone is going to go until about Friday, when the forecast becomes just a little bit more uncertain. But there's been a great deal of shift towards the west. It's looking more likely that this cyclone or tropical low could move into Western Australia and drop a lot of rainfall there. The Access G3 model, which has already always been the most easterly trending of the forecast models on this tropical low, now calls for it to move through the Northern Territory, but actually the Western Northern Territory at that. So you can see it kind of bounces across towards maybe Tennant Creek, Canteen Creek, that sort of area, still dropping this incredible amount of rainfall, and it's just constant rainfall until maybe Saturday or Sunday for some of these locations. So literally a week's supply of rainfall, very consistent, heavy rainfall, and it will push rivers beyond their major flooding levels. But you can see next Monday and Tuesday, this tropical low starts to get an idea of the places that it wants to be, and moving through the desert with a pressure of 986 millibars, very strong indeed. And I would not be totally shocked if this does actually get to cyclone status in terms of maximum wind speed around the core of the storm, because you're looking at sustained winds maybe around 30 to 35 knots around the centre of this cyclone as it moves through the desert. So it's going to be a really strong tropical low. Damaging wind gusts are certainly a possible scenario from this tropical low. And then it moves into the central South Australian desert towards sort of Ayers Rock and past Alice Springs, and then into South Australia, where it dies off next Wednesday and Thursday, still dropping an incredible amount of rainfall on the South Australia Northern Territory border. But thankfully it doesn't look like it's going to be this rain threat for Queensland. The next rain threat for Queensland is just going to be the banding features of this tropical low, which you can see will deliver a tremendous amount of rainfall in these heavy bands, starting basically today and extending right over towards Cardwell and Townsville on the eastern Queensland coastline. That does include Cairns, which could see up to 500 millimetres across the next 10 days. So a substantial amount of rainfall is still expected from this tropical low as it moves through. And if you take a look at rainfall accumulation over the next 5 days as this tropical low moves through the Northern Territory, locations around Wada, which have already received that 300 millimetres, are looking up for another 700 or 500 to 700 millimetres. So they could end up with 1,000 millimetres from this tropical low. And you're also looking out for maybe up to 500 millimetres extra on the Gulf of Carpentaria coastline, especially around Burketon and Corumba and Mornington Island. That's where we're expecting the worst of the rainfall. And there's also going to be a lot of rainfall throughout the Northern Territory and extending into the Central Northern Territory down towards Tennant Creek, where you're looking at probably a further 300 to 500 millimetres for some locations through there, and widespread totals above 200 millimetres. So a lot of places expecting a lot of rainfall, which is very concerning considering that there's already been a substantial amount of rainfall today, and rivers will be pushed beyond their major flooding levels by around Tuesday or Wednesday if this rainfall does keep up, because it is quite concerning, that's for sure, in terms of how much rainfall is expected. And you can see across parts of the Cape York Peninsula, a lot of rainfall also expected here, another 150 to 200 millimetres. Around Mareeba, you're looking at another 150 millimetres on top of the 150 that they've had in the past 24 hours. So another lot of rainfall is expected there. Now, before I jump over and take a look at the Queensland cyclone situation, I'm also going to take a look at what the Eastern Relief and the GFS models have in store for this tropical low 03U. Next Saturday and into Sunday, it moves into Western Australia, and it does kind of hold its intensity until Monday or Tuesday. As it's moving south of Fitzroy Crossing, it looks like it starts to strengthen a little bit, and yeah, it actually does make a good shot at becoming a cyclone, a very small cyclone. We've seen this before. Some of you might remember Tropical Cyclone 18S over, I think it was sort of Gascoyne Junction, Carnarvon area in 2021. That wrapped itself up into a fully fledged tropical cyclone over land, and it looks like this thing might actually do the same next Monday and Tuesday as it moves towards the Indian Ocean. And if it does get itself over water, even briefly, it could do a lot of damage in terms of intensification, and it could significantly impact its landfall site, which at this point looks to be around 80 Mile Beach. Maybe around, there's a roadhouse through here that I forgot the name of, but it was totaled in Cyclone Ilsa. I don't think it's Paraburdoo Roadhouse. Paraburdoo's down this sort of area. I'm not 100% sure of the name, but I'm sure someone in the comments would know it, so I thank you in advance for suggesting it to me. But we're going to take a look at the GFS model, because the GFS, again, has a very similar story in store for the Eastern Relief. And I did say yesterday that I think the GFS might actually be onto something here, and it turns out that it very well could be now, with model support increasing for this tropical low, which is kind of very ill-defined and hard to see, to move into the West Australian region. And it threatens to develop next Sunday just offshore from Broome, and this would definitely be a big rainmaker. Oh, actually, it turns out that it's not a big rainmaker, but I was thinking that this cyclone or tropical low could dump an incredible amount of rainfall over the top of Broome. It still manages to drop around 250 millimetres, and then over Broome maybe about 120 millimetres. So I guess that's a substantial amount of rainfall, but there will be far more rainfall across where this cyclone moves in the northern Western Australian regions and also across the Northern Territory. So be watching out for that, because where this cyclone tracks will have a big impact on how much rainfall certain locations do get. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys, especially in Queensland, which makes up for about 30% of our viewers, are very interested in this tropical low tropical cyclone that I've been teasing for the past sort of 10 minutes over the Coral Sea. Well, it becomes a very significant storm. You can see by around Thursday and into Friday, it starts to develop quite nicely. The Bureau of Meteorology has given this, I believe, a 40% chance of cyclone development in the next week, which for them is actually quite high. I wouldn't have picked that they'd be going that high, especially considering the low hasn't even developed yet, and it doesn't even look like it's trying to develop. But you can see it takes its sweet time, takes it till about Saturday and Sunday to really get its act together, and then it looks like it goes absolutely boom Sunday and into Monday, getting down into a 960 millibar central pressure, and you're looking here maybe a Category 3, approaching Category 4 strength tropical cyclone. This is a very similar forecast to what we saw with Cyclone Jasper as it was moving through the Coral Sea. And I mean, look at this, 937 millibars on approach to Townsville. That is a menacing picture there. This is a Category 5 strength tropical cyclone on the Australian scale, with winds of at least, I know the forecast model says about 80 knots from the east, but you're looking at winds probably about 115 knots with this sort of central pressure. So a very strong cyclone moving towards the Queensland coastline. It looks like it briefly weakens before it makes landfall, weakens very slightly before it makes landfall on Townsville, and then moves inland and weakens off quite significantly. So this would be one of the strongest cyclones to actually impact the Townsville area, and you're looking at winds probably approaching the 100 to 115 knot threshold. A strong Category 5 strength tropical cyclone on the Australian scale. Now, thankfully, this is only one forecast model. This is not the entire picture. This is not set in stone. It is just a forecast, and I can't be making any kind of warnings or predictions of this just yet. There is definitely the chance that the Queensland coastline gets impacted by a tropical cyclone, but if I was to switch it over and take a look at the GFS forecast model next Wednesday, they're still calling for this tropical cyclone to be set up offshore from Queensland, but it's nowhere near as powerful, and it's nowhere near as close to the Queensland coastline. In fact, it's just a really broad monsoonal sloppy mess by the look of this forecast picture, barely with cyclone winds as well. And also on the Eastern Relief forecast model, it barely develops into a strong tropical cyclone. It maybe gets towards Category 2 status, but it is a little bit further south, which is interesting, because if you were to go about 14 days out, it could be impacting areas south of Townsville, around the Rockhampton or Mackay sort of area. So this is an interesting picture. Either way, a cyclone is very likely to develop across the Coral Sea, in the Pacific Ocean, adjacent to the Queensland coastline. However, it's very uncertain of if it will impact land, and even more uncertain of if it impacts land, where will it impact. The Access model is just one of 4 major models that I use to make these videos, and right now it is calling for an absolute worst case scenario in terms of a Queensland landfall, but the Access model can also be very unreliable in the long range, so we'll have to watch this forecast very closely, because a lot can and a lot will change in terms of the landfall situation from this tropical cyclone and the threat situation from this tropical cyclone. But if this tropical low sits itself up across South Australia, then there will be quite a lot of steering currents pulling this cyclone into the Queensland coastline. And if it does get itself over the prime waters and conditions around the Coral Sea, over the Great Barrier Reef, then there's very little that's going to be stopping this cyclone from getting to a strong intensity. You're talking Category 4, Category 5 status. Because remember, close to the Queensland coastline, Cyclone Jasper really didn't take much energy out of the ocean. It took a lot of energy out across the South Pacific, but it's been a month, so it's had plenty of time to replenish itself, but it really wasn't a strong cyclone in terms of maximum winds as it made landfall on Cairns. Of course, the rainfall threat was absolutely devastating from that cyclone, but because of this storm's forward motion, which will be quite fast as per this forecast model, you're probably looking at maybe 200 to 300 millimeters, so nothing world-ending up here, which is good news. If this was to happen, you're not looking at the worst-case scenario flooding situation. However, a very powerful Category 5 going for a major population centre such as Townsville, that's a very concerning forecast to have. Now, just briefly, we're going to touch on the thunderstorm situation across southern Australia, because there's quite a lot to break down. Starting tomorrow, or even tonight in some locations, there will be some thunderstorms moving through Victoria, Tasmania, New South Wales and South Australia, driven by a cold front that's going to be swinging around up from Antarctica across the Southern Ocean. And that's going to bring in quite a lot of thunderstorm activity, especially from Wednesday morning. You're going to start to see these severe thunderstorms carrying heavy rainfall and probably some pretty damaging winds by the looks of things move through Tasmania into Victoria and up and towards New South Wales. Now, these thunderstorms across New South Wales will likely be those pulse thunderstorms initially earlier on in the day, and then they'll join up into big organised squally thunderstorms. I nearly said supercell thunderstorms, which are quite unlikely in this sort of situation. So you're looking at the risk of damaging winds, large hailstones, and also some very heavy rainfall in some locations, especially earlier on the day. That's when the heavy rainfall and the large hailstone threat is at its highest. But later on in the day, you're probably looking at more small hailstones and more damaging to locally destructive winds. And also in Victoria, you won't be escaping the thunderstorm activity there. Starting from around Wednesday 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning, you're looking at quite a lot of thunderstorm activity moving through the state, which will start to die off towards the evening hours. But the thunderstorms persist into around Thursday afternoon for northern New South Wales, and some of them could be fairly heavy in terms of the rainfall that they drop across New South Wales and Queensland towards the evening hours, and they will be driven by the energy that this tropical low up here across the Northern Territory will have. It will probably extend a nice a trough line extending from Western Australia across into Queensland, in fact into southeastern Queensland. That will promote thunderstorm activity across a lot of southern Queensland, but again, these will be pulse thunderstorms, likely not going to be severe, definitely not life-threatening, and there will be nothing on the thunderstorms that we had across Boxing Day and Christmas, which sadly were very devastating indeed, almost a month ago now. Wow, time has absolutely flown, that's for sure. Now, we were also talking about a lot of rainfall across parts of Tasmania, especially on the east coast. That's since died off quite a lot, but there is still quite a bit of rainfall across the next 10 days. A lot of places across Tasmania will get between 50 and 120 millimetres, with one or two locations across the east or the north expecting maybe 150 millimetres. And under the right thunderstorm or shower band, you could be seeing one or two locations pick up close to 200 millimetres. And it's a similar story around the Melbourne Metro, around Mount Dandenong. You're probably looking at some locations picking up close to 150 millimetres through there. But yeah, nothing too catastrophic or life-threatening, which is some good news there. The concentrated amounts of incredible rainfall totals remain across the Northern Territory and far north Queensland, and that's hopefully where they will stay, because we don't want rainfall to push into central Queensland like we were looking at, because in those really dry catchments is where we're looking at the major flooding and so forth. But the picture has become a lot prettier for Queensland, thank goodness, because a lot of locations around Mount Isa were staring down the barrel of maybe 1,000 millimetres of rainfall across the next 10 days. Now we're probably looking at maybe 100, but there will be locations that, again, pick up close to 500 millimeters. So the rainfall threat hasn't eased off entirely, but it has dramatically improved, which is some great news indeed. Once again, this is a forecast. A lot can change and a lot will change over the coming couple of days, so make sure you're staying tuned by subscribing and sticking up to date with the Bureau of Meteorology's latest warnings and information on their homepage, bom.gov.au. But that's the latest from us, and I'll catch you all in the next storm. Goodbye.
Thank you for watching our content this update. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe to get more updates covering all things weather and geophysics impacting Australia and the Oceania region. Subscribe to our other channels for more content from across the network, and be sure to check out our website where you can find free access to floater and radar imagery and articles on everything weather and much more.